Okay, we are ready.
Great, thanks, Brendan. Welcome to the December 8th, 2025 meeting of the Budget and Governmental Affairs Committee. My name is Steve Perez, and I am the chair of the committee. Tonight, we are joined by Assistant District Manager Brendan Berth. This meeting is called to order at 6:32 p.m. As a reminder, New York State law requires all committee members who are not able to attend the meeting in person to have their cameras on and their first and last names displayed from the time the meeting is called to order until the time the meeting is adjourned. Members of the public who are attending virtually, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. Members of the public who are here in person, it's not applicable to us. Thank you, Eva Marie, for volunteering to take minutes for tonight. We will now take attendance by roll call. Brendan will conduct the roll call.
Committee members, I will call your name. When your name is called, please say present. I'll announce if there is quorum. Tanya Arias.
Present.
Jim Collins, I do not see. B. Desmond.
Present.
Rob Barfin won't be with us tonight. Kate Kennedy.
Present.
Eva Marie Lassiter.
Present.
Rachel Patel.
Present.
Steve Perez.
Present.
Omer Qureshi, I do not see. And Miriam Rowe.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Great. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office as reflected on the screen before you. If there is no objection, we will adopt the agenda. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, please raise your hand. Seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. The minutes from the November 10th meeting were distributed ahead of time by the board office. If there is no objection, we will adopt the minutes as drafted. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the minutes, please raise your hand. Seeing no objections, the meeting minutes from the November 10th meeting are adopted. They will soon be available on the CB6 website. In order to conduct an effective meeting, let's observe a few ground rules. No one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members who are here in person, you have a question, please raise your hand. I'll identify you. Committee members who are unable to attend in person, if you have a question, please raise your hand through Zoom and I will identify you to speak. Please remember to speak only one at a time so members of the public watching at home can understand what is being said. Great. So I think the first item before anything else is to welcome Miriam Rolfe to the committee.
Thank you. Hello.
Welcome. And moving on to our first agenda item is Miriam's been on the board for a while. So
Yeah. We'll bring cake next time. Yeah.
Tonight's agenda, we'll be discussing New York State Senate Bill S6394A and S3606A aimed at addressing rising energy costs due to the repeal of energy tax credits and also data centers. So in our last meeting, we'd already discussed a bit about the first bill, which is being sponsored by Senator Krueger. And we have Justin Flagg here from Senator Krueger's office. So Justin, just to let you know, last meeting, we spent the bulk of the meeting just discussing an overview of the bill and sort of its key elements. But especially since we have a new member of the committee, I don't know if you want to just give like your quick overview of the bill, what it's trying to accomplish, and then maybe we can jump right into the Q&A since that's kind of where we ended last time with questions that we had.
Yeah, absolutely. So this bill, this is 3606, which we call the Stop Climate Polluter Handouts Act. And this is addressing a very small proportion of the subsidies that the state provides to encourage the use of fossil fuel. So it would repeal $350 million of tax expenditures that relate to fossil fuel use of an estimated $1.8 billion in tax expenditures that promote the use of fossil fuels. And so those are the expenditures that we have identified as sort of the most egregious, highly polluting sources. They represent about 20% of the total tax expenditures related to fossil fuels. So we're preserving the subsidies that directly benefit New Yorkers. So It doesn't touch the biggest expenditures, which are those for residential energy use, residential heating. It also preserves exemptions for automobile fuel over $2 a gallon, fuel used in farming and commercial fishing. So the biggest impacts are on fuel sold to airlines, um, the shipping industry, bunker fuel, and private jet users. Those are the biggest tax exemptions that are being repealed under this bill. And then, there's a whole host of other ones. They're spread throughout our tax law. Many of them have been in place for decades and decades. None of them have sunset clauses. They don't automatically repeal, so the legislature's never really taken a look at them again after passing them whenever they passed, many decades ago. So that's sort of the long and short of what the bill does.
Terrific. And I know Brendan shared our questions with you ahead of time.
Yeah, do you want me to? I'm happy to just go through those.
Run through them and then we can see if there are remaining questions.
Yeah, sure. So I have them here. So the first question was, would you consider working on a bill that transfers the subsidies to New York City residents so improvements can be made to meet local law 97 requirements instead of just paying the fine? So Senator Krueger has been having discussions with stakeholders about state level options to help building owners that are struggling to make these investments to meet local law 97 requirements, particularly co-ops. And I know this is something that the incoming mayoral administration has said is a priority for them. In terms of this bill, transferring the money saved by repealing these tax expenditures directly to another purpose is complicated, in part because several of these taxes are, they're all existing taxes. So we're just getting rid of the exemptions to some of these existing taxes. And several of them, for example, are already earmarked for things like the dedicated Bridge and Highway Trust Fund. But primarily, Senator Krueger opted not to take a position on how this specific pot of additional revenue would be spent, since that's something that has to be worked out through the budget process and weighed against all the other competing interests in the budget. And we felt that the point here um, is to take a position that, we don't think these particular tax expenditures are justified. We think this money could be better used elsewhere, but there are a lot of competing interests. That one is a perfectly valid one. And so, that's a conversation that we didn't want to prejudge in this particular bill. So the next question is, how will this bill be defended and what protections would be put in place to avoid assault from the federal government? We don't believe that this bill is vulnerable to a legal challenge because it's only removing exemptions from the requirement to pay taxes and putting these use cases on an equal footing with all others rather than implementing a new tax that singles out these use cases. And that's entirely within the state's power. It happens all the time. Every year in the budget, we discuss some tax expenditures, whether to continue them or discontinue them. And so this is just an extension of that. Whether it will provoke some kind of backlash from the administration in Washington is impossible to say, and certainly Senator Krueger wouldn't want to be engaged in any kind of preemptive compliance for fear that the president might lash out. I will say that $350 million is a very small portion of the several billions of dollars in increased costs that the administration is putting on states like New York that we're going to have to deal with in the next budget. So, yeah. The next question, what is the anticipated impact of this bill on utility bills in the district? So if anything, this bill would have a de minimis impact on gas utility bills. The provisions that actually impact the gas distribution system total less than $6 million. And of course, that's across the entire state. To put that number in perspective, Senator Krueger's bill to repeal the 100-foot rule subsidy for expanding the gas system, which is awaiting the governor's signature right now would save ratepayers more than $600 million every year. The primary drivers for utility rate increases are inflation, the cost of expanding in the gas system, repairing the century-old infrastructure for the gas and electric system, expansion of data centers and cryptocurrency miners, which I know we're going to talk about, and property taxes. And Senator Krueger co-sponsors a whole suite of bills that have all passed the Senate this session to implement some key affordability reforms in the utility rate setting process. And we're hopeful that we'll see some of those included in the executive budget in January. Next question, what are the groups or types of businesses that will be directly affected by the repeal of the specific subsidies in the bill, and who will continue to receive subsidies? So as I mentioned, the bill doesn't repeal the biggest current tax expenditures, which directly benefit everyday New Yorkers. Those include the residential energy use, residential heating, automobile fuel over $2 a gallon, fuel used in farming and commercial fishing, public transit, nonprofits and veterans organizations, volunteer ambulance and fire departments, propane, butane, and ethane used for non-transportation purposes, and some others. The biggest single industry impacted will be the airlines. That's around 150 million. To put that in context, in 2024, the US passenger airlines reported a net profit after taxes of 6.7 billion, and their operating revenue was 247 billion. So the current subsidy that New York taxpayers are paying to the airline industry is about 2% of their profits, about 0.06% of their operating revenue. And in the conversations that we had with economists about the bill, their opinion was that at most, repealing the subsidy for fuel sold to airlines could lead to an increase of a few dollars in the total cost of a business class transatlantic flight. There's research on who actually flies, who makes up the passengers on US flights. It says that 12% of Americans account for 68% of all the flights taken. So even if the airline ticket prices rise a couple of dollars, that cost is going to fall on a very small number of well-off people who account for the majority of the flights. So that's the biggest chunk. The shipping industry will also be impacted, though on a much smaller scale, through the repeal of the exemption for bunker fuel. Private jet users and private jet charter companies will be impacted by the repeal of the jet fuel exemption. And all the other exemptions, which again are now a pretty small proportion of that 350 million, are spread broadly across many other industries across the entire state, with no single industry experiencing a large share of that impact. Next question, has the senator considered ways to support low-income households and small businesses who may face rising utility costs as a result of the reduction in fossil fuel subsidies? Are there other state programs or legislation that will provide this type of relief? So, as I mentioned, this bill will have little to no impact on utility bills. Those are driven by inflation, property taxes, repairing and expanding the infrastructure, data centers, cryptocurrency mines. Slowing the growth of utility rates and even bringing those rates down is complex, but there are things that the state can and should be doing. That includes repealing the 100-foot rule, which costs ratepayers $600 million every year. When the governor signs that bill, that cost burden will be removed in future rate cases. Senator Krueger would like to see the governor reverse the cuts to the Empower Plus program. This is a really important program that supports energy efficiency, weatherization, electrification, retrofits. It not only saves individual customers money, but it also, by reducing the need for system-wide investments in capacity and transmission, it reduces costs for all ratepayers who support the whole system. There's other programs like the statewide Solar for All program, Green Jobs, Green New York, the Green Affordable Pre-Electrification Fund. Senator Krueger carries a bill to tax energy used by cryptocurrency miners. We just introduced this a couple months ago. It could raise several $100 million. And the bill earmarks that revenue for energy affordability programs that the utilities run, that these are existing programs, to expand those, support low and moderate income ratepayers. And then there's a package of utility reform bills that I mentioned the Senate passed earlier this year to reform the rate making process. They didn't move in the Assembly. Um, Hopefully, the governor will pick some of those up in her executive budget. They reform the earnings sharing mechanism, push for more transparency on capital expenses that get included in the rate cases, reform the return on equity process, which is a really critical part that's driving up rates across the country right now, and several other important pieces of that rate making process. So there's a lot to do in that space. The last question, why would you further burden New York State manufacturers, processors, and farmers by making them less competitive than their counterparts in most other states? And by making manufacturing less competitive, this bill will threaten the wage prospects of lesser educated, blue-collar working New Yorkers, while also making goods and foodstuffs made in New York less affordable. So first, as I mentioned, this bill does not impact tax exemptions for fuel used in farming. The industries that are most directly impacted are the airlines, international shipping, private jet users. The impacts on those industries are minuscule compared to their profits, so there's not going to be any jobs lost in those industries as a result of this bill. And I would say that far from making New York less competitive, getting rid of outdated tax exemptions that have been on the books for decades and don't serve a compelling public interest is just good government. Because when we give away $350 million in tax breaks, that means everybody else has to cover those costs. And when Senator Krueger thinks about a subsidy, she thinks about, what is it that we're promoting? Is that thing a public good? And would that thing happen without this subsidy in place? So the purpose of a subsidy is to encourage a particular behavior. Many companies have short-term options to use less polluting processes. Most companies have medium and long-term options, but if we subsidize pollution with New Yorkers' tax dollars, then they are incentivized to keep polluting, which creates additional costs on New Yorkers in the form of the pollution it creates. So we're paying twice. So spending taxpayer money to prop up fossil fuels is not a win for New York's economy. In fact, a lot of that money leaves the state. So every year, New Yorkers spend about $30 billion just on oil for transportation. 84% of that, $25 billion, goes directly out of state and into the oil industry's pockets, out of state, overseas. Spending on green jobs and the green economy, on the other hand, keeps more money in New York. In 2023, there were 170,000 jobs in New York's clean energy industry. That's 2.5 times more jobs than in the fossil fuel industry. Clean energy jobs are growing at 4.7%, which is significantly more than the 1.6% overall economic growth in the state. And those are primarily blue-collar jobs. So far from being a negative for the economy, this bill is a positive for the economy. It's a positive for taxpayers, for good government, and for the climate. So those were the questions that I got. Happy to take anything else.
Do you want any other committee member?
Right.
Go ahead.
I submitted a question, but evidently it wasn't on the list. I have a question regarding the rates for the utility rates for New York State consumers, because it says that the bill would like to provide utility discounts for communities in which there will be data centers created, and there's a lot of background material with the bill talking about the use of AI, and that with tech centers, data centers using AI, there's a great deal of demand. And you give an example that in Santa Clara, California, where there is a tech data center. The data center consumed 82% of all of the electricity for the city.
I
But,
don't mean to interrupt. Sorry, that's the other bill. That's not my bill.
oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
we're not on that one yet.
It's
Sorry.
this,
That's
yeah.
the second
Oh,
bill.
all right, all
So,
right. Oh, it's
hold your
okay.
question for
You're-
that. Go ahead.
Justin, hi. First and foremost, thank you for joining us and please thank Senator Krueger. She's always so amazing in everything that she does.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that, it's interesting to see that we have been subsidizing, fossil fuels. Meanwhile, buildings in New York are now being saddled with local law 97 and CMA coming down the pike. And in fact, some buildings have decided they're just going to pay the fine because it's impossible to retrofit a 100-year-old building or so I'm just wondering if there's anything coming down in legislative terms in terms of maybe shifting a little bit of that subsidy for buildings that are of a certain age, or maybe giving them some sort of exemption or some tax benefits to have to retrofit, these pre-war buildings that it's almost impossible to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something that Senator Krueger is cognizant of, and we have had some preliminary conversations with some folks at the city and some advocates and at NYSERDA. We're not at the place where there's a concrete proposal at this point, but as I mentioned, that is something that the incoming mayor specifically talked about, trying to, find ways to support the buildings so that they can actually achieve the goals, because that's the point, is, to make those changes, not to penalize people. Um, I think there will be some opportunities in the upcoming, so we want to work with the city and see what they come up with. I think there's been discussions of um, creating some economies of scale with a one-stop shop and single buyers, a place where buildings can go so that they don't have to like bring to bear all of this engineering expertise and, every step of the way, and figure out who the best contractors are and try to negotiate for their own deals on heat pumps or whatever the thing is. Um, and also um, providing some kind of low cost financing underwritten by the city or the state or some kind of a revolving loan fund. So those discussions are happening, but also in the budget, I think there are opportunities that we would like to see um, some money made available to the city for those purposes. In last year's budget, we had $1 billion for the Sustainable Futures Fund. It's $1 billion over 5 years, but still, there was money in there for things like electrification of schools and school buses. So I think, if there's an opportunity in there for a pot of money to help, buildings on the lower income or asset scale to be able to make these changes, but there's nothing concrete yet.
Thank you, Justin.
Any other questions from other committee members? I had just one last question, and that is, what do you feel are the prospects for this bill in this next legislative session? Is there a lot of opposition? Do you have a lot of sponsors behind it?
I think the prospects are decent. This bill is one that has sort of slowly climbed the legislative ladder. We've held it for several years, but the last 2 years it's been in the Senate's one house budget. The one house budgets are kind of the legislative house's response to the governor's executive budget, and then we all get together and negotiate from those positions. So that is significant that the Senate has said we want to see this. I think over the last year, it has gained a lot of support in the Assembly. So we are hoping to see it in the Senate's one house. I mean, we're hoping to see it in the governor's executive budget, and certainly we have reached out, and I have no idea what's going to be in her budget. So it's possible. Obviously, this is a year with significant budgetary challenges because of the huge gaps we need to fill. So that's part of why the Senate has put it in previous years, because we need the money. Um, And it just seems like, although it has always seemed to me sort of, it's obvious, let's stop throwing good money after bad.
Yeah.
You know, if we came to our legislative colleagues with a proposal for $350 million in tax breaks to benefit the fossil fuel industry, that would, you know, be dead on arrival. So the fact that we leave it in there just because it has no sunset date, you know, is not great policy. So, you know, I'm hopeful. Obviously, nothing is certain, and it's really going to be it's in the budget fight or negotiation. So we'll see.
Great. Can I just take a quick straw poll of the committee then? I mean, what we'd like to do is pass a resolution that would include this and say that we support it.
Mhm.
My question is, do we have anybody on the committee who's opposed to the bill?
No,
Okay, perfect. So, Justin, do you happen to have any language that we could use as a template for our resolution, or we're happy to draft one on our own?
I have you know, memos of support that other groups have done in the past. I can send those along. That might be a good starting place.
That would be
That'd be
perfect.
great.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
And next month we'll look at the resolution.
absolutely.
Does I need a volunteer who would like to help draft the resolution?
If it can be done within the next week, yes, because I'm traveling on Monday for Europe.
Or that someone can start it and then,
Yeah, I mean, well, if you can get it done, you can get it done before you go. Do you have the time? That's the question.
Do I have the time?
Yeah,
Getting a little tight. I
Yeah.
mean, I can try and work on it.
okay,
Okay?
maybe
You
take a
think-
stab at it and then I'll,
I'll take
Yeah,
a
yeah.
stab at it.
I mean, I can also help with it. I just can't do it right now. Is the holiday craziness, but maybe
No,
if you
but
don't finish or you leave. I
This
can
is
finish
my
it.
10th meeting in the last 7 days.
Yeah,
So
okay,
I'm on a million other
yeah,
organizations, so.
between the three of us. then
Yeah,
we will-
Between the three
Yeah.
of us, I can
Yeah.
take a stab at it. Justin, it's a great bill. I hope we make a contribution to help it get approved.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Perfect, great, so we'll move on to the next bill. And we have Elaine Silver here from Senator Gonzalez's office, who's the sponsor for that bill. So thank you so much for being with us in person. We did not discuss a summary of the bill. We did share a lot of background materials with the committee.
Okay.
We shared the language of the bill and then a lot of different articles that have been written, some YouTube things that have been gone out about data centers and things like that. But please feel free to give us your take on the bill summary, and then we can go to the Q&A.
Phenomenal, great. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here to present tonight. My name is Elon Silver. I'm Senior Counsel and Committee's Director for Senator Gonzalez. I work very closely with the Senator across our technology portfolio, including this bill that I'll present on tonight. So the bill that we're talking about tonight is S6394A. We call this the Data Centers Transparency Bill. Just to talk a little bit about the issue area and the reason for this bill. As we all know, AI has kind of like captured public imagination and is like kind of front and center in our societal consciousness. AI requires a tremendous amount of computing power using highly specialized hardware in order to work properly, which differentiates it from a lot of other computer software. Think like data storage, like streaming services. So in particular, AI requires GPUs, graphical processing units, which consume an order of magnitude or orders of magnitude more energy and have greater cooling demands than previous generations of data centers. Data centers are being constructed at a very, very rapid pace, and the data is also showing elevated energy costs in proximity to these data centers. And then when you look at also the economic impact of conventional versus AI data centers, conventional data centers have a much clearer positive economic impact. So for instance, a conventional data center powers Zoom chats, powers cloud computing that's required for remote work, and a lot of economic activity that's front and center in our current workforce. AI, in particular, generative AI, has much more speculative economic value, and the data centers that are consuming tremendous amounts of power and lots of water are notorious for hiring very, very few employees. So the economic growth that is promised from these AI data centers is much more speculative and a lot harder to kind of pin down. So that leads us to our data center transparency bill S 6394. It takes two major steps towards improving transparency around the planning, construction, and operation of data centers, in particular requiring disclosure reports and public engagement prior to a data center beginning even construction. So disclosure reports need to be submitted to the Public Service Commission at least 180 days before construction on a data center begins. It has to be posted on the Public Service Commission's website and has to be updated annually. So the idea here is that these disclosure reports will be updated as the data center is operating, so the community and the broader environment has better information on how the data center is operating. So the information that would have to be included in these disclosure reports would be info on the host community. So it'd have to disclose where the data center will operate, which seems obvious, but is actually a major step in improving the transparency of these facilities. They'd have to include information on employment data, including how many full-time employees the facility will be taking on, whether those employees are coming from the host community, and the education level of these employees, again, so we can understand who these data centers are bringing in to employ on site. There would have to be information on energy usage forecasts, and then it would have to be updated after the fact with actual usage. So included in these energy usage forecasts, there would have to be an overall forecast for the consumption of the site, both at peak and at average load. There'd have to be disclosures around the percentage of energy that's coming from renewable resources versus resources that are creating greenhouse gases. There'd have to be a measurement of on and off-site emission forecasts. So they'd have to forecast how much carbon dioxide is being produced either on-site through cooling activities, or if there's on-site energy generation, they'd have to disclose that. And then an estimation of how much off-site, how much greenhouse gases are being produced at the energy generation facility, wherever that may be. There would also have to be disclosures around recovered waste heat. So one option, so the heat that's created by these facilities can actually be reused in a number of interesting ways. So for instance, at Empire AI, which is the state-owned data center facility in Buffalo, the waste heat is being recovered and being used to heat hot water in the dormitories at the University of Buffalo. So there are all sorts of interesting things that can be done to alleviate some of the environmental aspects of these data centers. Another piece that would have to be included in these disclosure reports is how water is being used. So graphical processing units require, like I said, tremendous cooling. Water is kind of the de facto cooling method for these data centers. And the water that's available tends to be the same resources that we draw on for drinkable water. So there's potential major risk to some of the natural water resources in the communities where these data centers operate. So there would have to be disclosure reports on the water that's being withdrawn from the local aquifers or public water facilities, and then discharge data. Because the water, once it's used, it has to go somewhere. So typically, the water that's returned is returned at a very high temperature. So it's not being returned in the same state that it was withdrawn from, and it's also being discharged with pollutants. So the discharged water is not just hot, it also contains certain contaminants that can have a negative impact on the water supplies. In addition to the disclosure reports, the bill requires public engagement. This would include at least 2 public hearings, with at least one of those public hearings happening in the host community where the data center will be constructed. Something that we hear from a lot of these communities is that they simply have no idea that a data center is being built where they live. And they face the issues after the data center is constructed, because these data centers are constructed in such secrecy that many times community members are not aware of data center in their community until it exists. The data center operator would also have to present to the community on its disclosure report. So the local community would get information about the scale of the facility and how the facility will manage the energy demands and the water usage nearby. And then they would also have to address efforts and address any questions from the community on negative impacts to the host community. So the bill itself actually goes farther than just mandating transparency. Some of the other features of the bill, it would charge the New York Power Authority, the Public Service Commission, and the state's Climate Action Council to generate reasonable energy consumption efficiency goals for data centers to help align with the CLCPA benchmarks. The CLCPA is, of course, the state's plan to transition off of greenhouse gas dominated energy consumption and transition to renewables. The bill would prohibit data centers from purchasing fossil fuel generated power at a discount using purchase power agreements. So today, data centers can purchase power from fossil fuel facilities at a discount by promising to purchase a certain amount of power for a certain amount of time. This bill would outlaw that practice.
Thank you, thank you.
The other thing that it does, the final aspect of the bill that I would describe is it creates a surcharge for data centers. Data centers would be required to pay into a fund that would be used as a discount plan for low-income consumers to offset higher energy costs. So these are some of the main features of the bill. Again, the bill is focused on data center transparency. We have another companion bill that I will actually discuss at a higher level of generality in response to some of the questions, because what we saw in generating this bill, yes, transparency is important and it's needed, but it can only go so far, and additional steps are needed to protect ratepayers from the kind of insidious impacts of the siting of these data centers nearby and on the same energy infrastructure that they are also drawing from. So with that, I will go into the questions that have been raised to me in advance of my arrival here. And then I will open it to the floor for any other questions. So first prepared question, my question is for Senator Gonzalez. Given the outwardly aggressive anti-climate and pro-fossil fuel policies at the federal level, what mechanisms will be put in place in New York to ensure that the bill is not defeated or sabotaged by the federal government once approved? The president is still trying to defeat congestion pricing in the city. So actually, this is something that we've seen repeatedly coming from the federal government is efforts to basically preempt all state level AI laws. And this would certainly fall into the same category as those efforts. A little bit separate and aside from the pro-fossil fuel policies, this is something, I think the biggest risk is coming from these AI preemption rules. So unfortunately, under the Constitution, if the federal government lawfully preempts our law, there isn't that much we can do. However, there are quite a few favorable signs that we will not see a law that preempts AI laws more broadly. So, for instance, we've heard a number of different efforts by Republican legislators to include in really important bills, be it the reconciliation bill that was passed in April at the federal government. Most recently, the National Defense Authorization Bill that was just recently passed. They've tried to include preemption language in both of these bills, and we have been able to rally our colleagues on both sides of the aisle at the state level to defeat these efforts. So from a legislative perspective, we have a very, very good track record at defeating these preemption efforts at the federal level. This shows that there isn't actually a lot of appetite for these laws, even in Republican states. And this is what the federal administration needs to really meaningfully preempt our state AI laws. The second piece, the president may attempt to actually announce today his intention to preempt state AI laws in executive order. Legal authority for preempting state law through executive order is basically non-existent. He cannot preempt state law.
Separation of church. I mean,
Separation of powers.
Don't need democracy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, he
He
just
needs
never
to-
gets tired of doing this.
He needs to do it through the law. And as I mentioned, if the Senate or the House can't include this language in a bill, he can't get it into a law. So how it would most likely work if he were to get it through an executive order is it would activate the Department of Justice to potentially investigate these things. They might make life hard, but ultimately the legal authority is on our side that you cannot preempt state laws through executive order. Finally, our office is laser focused on this issue. We're continuing to track it. You will see that the senator tweeted and posted on her social media in opposition to this executive order. We have sent letters to the president and to the delegations from New York State in the Senate and the House in opposition to these to preemption rules, and we have a very, very good track record. We have relationships with legislators nationwide that are also tracking these issues. We are so focused on this issue, and we will continue to push back against preemption efforts, including those that might frustrate these energy focused bills that we're seeing that address these data centers. So I hope that addresses the question. The second question that I got, one of the concerns about the significant build out of data centers is that utility companies have overestimated the energy supply that will be needed based on current projections and are planning on building too much capacity. If the demand does not materialize, how will the upfront investment that utility companies have already committed to be paid for? Does this bill do anything to address those concerns? So it does something to address those concerns in that it adds a little bit of transparency around where data centers will emerge. Because as I mentioned before, there is a tremendous amount of secrecy around the planning and construction of these data centers. We just do not know when they will be added. There is some information in the New York Independent System Operators queue. So the New York Independent System Operators it's a pseudo-governmental entity that controls the biggest connections to the New York energy infrastructure. And what you'll see there are mostly solar plants that are connecting to add capacity to the grid. You'll see in that list, I just reviewed it in prep for today, there are about 4 data centers on that list, all located upstate. But again, this is not a complete view of the data centers that are proposed or coming online. It's actually much broader. However, in addressing the needs to reinforce the infrastructure, to build out more energy generation, to build out better energy transmission infrastructure, because it's not just creating more energy, it's creating the infrastructure that can transmit that energy from the power plants to the data centers. There's a need to invest there, and the state has not meaningfully invested in a lot of this infrastructure since the 70s. So before the data centers ever came online, there is an existing and growing need to invest in this infrastructure. However, the urgency is now demanded by these data centers. So our office, in partnership with Assemblymember Anna Callis's office, has introduced a new bill, S8540, the AC/DC Act. I'll repeat that for everybody.
What is the name, the number?
S8540.
Mhm.
The long title is the Accountability of Costs for Data Centers Act, or the AC/DC Act. What this bill would do is this bill would create a new customer classification for large energy consumers. These are consumers that have a peak demand of 20 megawatts or more. This would cover the average size AI data center. So it's a smart threshold. And these energy customers, these large energy consumers, as defined under the bill, they would be held fully responsible for upgrades to energy generation and transmission infrastructure that would be required to bring them online. And they would also be held responsible for any increases in rates that ratepayers would be responsible for. So we see these bills as working in tandem and hand in hand to create more transparency around the construction, and then to alleviate some of the burden on consumer ratepayers due to the construction and operation of these data centers in the state. The next question that I got, are there plans to build any new data centers or expand existing new ones in New York City? And if so, where? As I mentioned before, this secrecy, the non-disclosure agreements that have been in place around all these data centers is intractable. It makes it very difficult for us to understand where these data centers are being positioned, where they're being considered, where they're being constructed. As I mentioned, we'll only get that information through the independent system operators queue. And if there's no new connection to the grid, so if they're using an existing, like repurposing an existing connection, there's no need for them to disclose it on the New York ISO queue. So this bill would solve this problem by requiring transparency around the planning prior to the construction of a new data center, along with the community engagement piece. So if a new data center was planned for the community, they would have to bring in the community. They would have to share
Okay,
this disclosure report before a new data center, before construction even started on a new data center.
and there's nothing like that now?
There is not. There's not, with the exception of the independent system operators, queue, which they're only required to do because that's like a business practice. There's no regulatory requirement that the data center has to disclose this. So for instance, if a data center operator decided to build like a data center, it wouldn't really work in New York, but build a data center and decided to power it purely with like diesel generators, there wouldn't really be a disclosure required there, even though they would be creating massive pollution, massive air pollution. There would be no requirement for them to disclose it. And they can keep the entire construction staff under NDAs. So even if like somebody who's on the construction team wanted to share this, they would not be able to. If they did, they would be sued. So that's the way this works in a lot of cases. Next question. I presume you are aware of Senator Ted Cruz's bill, Senate Bill 2750, that would effectively nationalize the regulation of AI plants, so this may be moot. The bill is opposed by a large segment of Ted Cruz's own party, the populist MAGA Republicans, who see it as too much influenced by the tech bros. Assuming Cruz's bill dies and New York State can regulate energy pricing as in your bill, would you be comfortable expanding New York State's use of small modular reactors of the type that power the Navy's nuclear fleet? So I won't address the first part of the question because I think I addressed it in my earlier statement around us fighting against preemption. There's generally no appetite, even amongst the Republicans, to pass a bill that would preempt state laws governing AI.
Yeah, and that will go to the court, and I mean, it's a states' rights issue, where conservative courts would come out in favor of this.
And
Yeah.
ironically, it affects red states more than it does blue states.
It's
These
true.
data centers, yeah.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, I would say the biggest state that's impacted by data centers is actually Virginia, which is a purple state.
It's a purple state,
It's a
yeah.
purple state, and they have something called Data Center Alley, where they have the greatest concentration of AI data centers of anywhere in the country, anywhere in the Western Hemisphere right now, actually. And it's having dramatic negative health effects on those who are
I
in the
read about
community.
it, yeah.
Yeah,
It's pretty
and-
bad.
Yeah. So anyways, to get back to the question, small modular reactors. So, as an office, we're open to new solutions that can help us move away from fossil fuel generated power. However, nuclear energy has a pretty difficult track record in the States. There are a lot of questions that have to be answered. So nuclear facilities can take decades to bring online. There would be a very robust regulatory regime that would have to be put in place in order for us to confirm that a small modular reactor can be safe to deploy on site, which is required. Based on our experience with full-size nuclear facilities, these can take multiple decades to build and tens of billions of dollars to build. And then to say nothing of the waste management issues that come along on the other side. On the other hand, we know that simpler renewables are safer, they can be built quickly. Our state has a very clear place for this in our entire energy mix. So I think all things equal, we would prefer more thinking about how we can deploy more green energy through renewables, but we are not categorically excluding any solutions. Which brings me to the next solution, which is natural gas. Natural gas. Would you favor the repeal of the New York State ban on fracking of the Marcellus and Utica shales, given that fracking is happening literally within a stone's throw of the New York-Pennsylvania border, and drillers in Pennsylvania are capturing natural gas from under New York State boundaries by means of directional drilling and the rule of capture? It would seem to me that continuing the ban is purely performative at this point. As an office, we would not be in favor of removing restrictions on fracking. Given the state's CLCPA goals, we cannot continue to invest in energy generation that relies on fossil fuels. That said, I think, as I mentioned before, natural gas energy remains a part of the overall mix of energy generation in the state. While we as an office believe we should be moving away from greenhouse gas producing energy consumption, we acknowledge that today there is a place for it. And our office is not in a position where we can reject any solutions wholesale. I would say given, if we had to prioritize it, this is like removing restrictions on fracking is just not something that we would really consider meaningfully. The final question that I got, given that tech data centers use markedly more electricity than consumers, is there a proposal to have utility companies separate consumer electricity usage from tech data center electricity usage? Tech data centers are increasing their demand for more electricity from the utility companies, which allows utility companies to raise rates for all electricity usage. Therefore, New York State consumers have increased electricity rates when their electricity usage is grouped with tech data center electricity usage. So as I mentioned, the ACDC Act bill, which is our companion bill to the Data Centers Transparency Bill, would create this new customer classification for large energy consumers. Of course, the energy that flows through our infrastructure, there's no way to distinguish or discriminate between energy that's destined for a data center or destined for a consumer. But what we can discriminate on is who is consuming it and making sure that the costs are allocated in a way that's fair. So the ACDC Act requires the Public Service Commission to mitigate impacts to all other service classifications from large energy consumers. So this would include surcharges and the cost of basic service. So when you pay your energy bill, you're not just paying for the energy that you're consuming, you're also paying for the longer term investments in the energy infrastructure and the transmission infrastructure that is upgrades of which would be required to serve these large energy consumers. So if an upgrade to energy generation or energy transmission is required to serve a data center, this bill would ensure that all those costs are borne by the data center operator and not by consumer customers. The whole goal of this bill is to help ensure that consumers do not experience any inflated energy hikes that a lot of other jurisdictions have experienced due to the proximity of a data center in their community. So that's the bill. Those are the questions that were prepared for me. I am happy to answer any other questions from the group.
Go ahead, B, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I do. So, by the way, thank you for the bill. I've been involved twice in building of data centers. And the question I have is how do you ensure security and transparency? Having gone through public hearings and involvement for years, the whole question of security of the data centers generally come in with the data that they're processing and handling it. How would you handle the difference?
Sure. So I think when you're talking about security, you're talking about the physical security of a data center. So, typically the physical security of a data center would be the responsibility of the data center operator. And certainly there is a trade-off that's required. When you ask a data center operator why they aren't more transparent about the siting of a data center, they will always point to security. So there is a balance that has to be struck here. So for instance, one solution that we would be willing to explore would be potentially withholding the physical address of a data center. But frankly, when you know the general community where a data center is going to be sited, all it takes is somebody with a car to drive around and they can make an educated guess as far as where a data center will be sited. That very same calculus applies to basically any other data center. Somebody with a car with use of Google Maps who has a sense of what these data centers typically look like from above, can generally identify the location of a data center. But like I said, the operational security of a data center would generally be the responsibility of the data center operator itself and not the responsibility of the broader community. So I think, again, given the scale of investments that are required for these facilities, improving operational facility would likely be, when you look at the overall cost of constructing a data center, which could easily be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, adding robust physical security to your site is something that makes sense. And that would certainly be encouraged, and would be a pretty small piece of the overall investment for the construction of a data center. Does that answer the question? B?
B, you're on mute. B, can you hear us? You're on mute.
Okay, so I understand what you say and I absolutely agree with it, but having gone through decades on building two things, and what was involved in it, it really becomes a stopgap measure for success in building a data center if you need it. So there's a lot that goes into that, but I really feel I feel the data centers now are like octopuses, and we really have to stop their placement in communities which have adverse effect, but yet we do need them for certain transactions. So I understand, but politically it's a nightmare when you try to scope and plant a data center.
I hear that. I would say right now, it's because the regulatory regime is not fully developed, I would argue that the environment is quite, it's quite good for data center construction. But I agree, there is some sort of a trade-off that's required to increase transparency. And the cost might be some security, but I think it's our feeling that when these data centers are hoovering up, natural resources, are consuming, goods that resources that we share as a community, like energy, that there are some sacrifices that have to be made in order to be a good member of a community. And I think, ensuring that the data center operators are responsible for securing their own facilities, I think is only fair, as a trade-off for bringing the broader community into the conversation here.
Go ahead, Edenor.
I have a question regarding, since it's called the transparency bill. In the background for the bill, there was quite a bit of information in terms of certain, particularly where there is AI, that certain large tech data centers do use third-party data centers for part of the energy that they need. But because technically they don't own those other data centers, they don't have to report that. So it's not on their books. Is that something that's going to be looked into because because any sort of emissions, they would not be responsible for when they are actually causing it by using an additional, I would say, an additional data center for the energy that they need, particularly now that it is AI. So is there something regarding the transparency where they can say, oh, that's not us because we used it, but we don't own it. So we're not responsible for the emissions.
So this bill would apply to any data center that's physically, geographically sited within New York State. So that's principally what we're getting to here. So that's the way that we've designed this bill, and that has to do with the way the Constitution works is that we can't really govern physical like energy, like the consumption of energy or activities that are happening outside of New York State, right? So this bill is designed to address all data centers that are sited within New York State, regardless of who is using them. Because something that we found in our research is that, the way data centers are organized, they can be organized in many different ways. You can have one massive data center that's only being used by one company for any mix of activities. You can have a data center, a so-called co-located data center, where you have clients that are renting out the compute. So it's another important distinction is that data centers don't create energy. They host compute. There are computers that are basic thing of a data center is it's an accumulation of a lot of computers. So when this bill is talking primarily about the operators and owners of the data centers themselves, not the users of the compute. So for instance, something that we couldn't really address would be the energy efficiency of a data center, for instance, in New Jersey or Pennsylvania. This is just simply not something that we can do, that the Constitution will strike down. It would be unlawful under federal law for us to regulate data centers that are outside of New York State. But this bill would address every single data center that's in New York State.
No, but I'm talking about a very large one that's using AI.
Mhm.
And they're using, let's say, they're still utilizing a smaller data center for part of the energy that they need.
Okay.
But you're saying that they would not, so they're actually responsible for any sort of emissions and so forth that happen there, but they're not responsible because they don't actually own it. To me, it's just sort of, not having that on their book, so to speak.
Okay,
There's nothing to address that at all.
so somebody.
And it's in New York State.
Right.
Let's say it's in New York State.
So even if like it is, the capacity is leased, somebody is owning, somebody is controlling, somebody is the owner of that data center,
Yes.
right? Even if another company is renting space, the duties under this bill fall on the owner operator of that data center, not necessarily the user, because it creates, because of the ability of multiple users to use a data center, it creates like dizzying line drawing problems. So for instance, you could have a data center where you have 1,000 different companies that are renting out compute, that are renting out the use of a particular data center. So in the interest of making this like as straightforward as possible, like the people that are renting compute from that data center, it's not reasonable to expect them to have great visibility into how that data center is purchasing
Right.
power. So the idea is, but I think there's another issue that you're raising, which is like a number of small data centers that are aggregated to create like a single use. So basically, you're trying to find a loophole in the law so if we have like energy usage thresholds in the law, so if for instance, we call a data center a 5 megawatt data center, and instead of one 5 megawatt data center, you have 5 1 megawatt data centers that are scattered around and you merge them, that's another, I think, more interesting question that has a very difficult, it's far more difficult to answer. But I think it's important to answer your question that we are talking about the owners and operators of the data centers, not the people who are renting the space or renting the compute or the use of these data centers, because we can't, like, it is impossible for us to know what they are using it for. And we don't want to know what they're using it for. All we care about is that the energy use is massive, that they are using a lot more resources than jobs or economic activities in they're creating, and that the local community has to be aware that this is nearby and that they should have some say in the construction and operation of the data center.
It sounds like a loophole. To me.
So which part sounds like the
The
loophole?
fact that you say, all right, the larger data center is a user of the smaller, and I understand the other is an owner, and so that any sort of emission would be, that smaller center would be responsible for. But to me, it's not giving a true disclosure of actually, the amount of, the demand that the larger data center actually is utilizing, even though it's not on site. To me, there's something that's not in the disclosure, the transparency
So,
with that practice.
so again, we are principally focused with the energy consumption that's happening physically at the data centers. It doesn't, from our perspective, it doesn't matter who is using it or what they're using it for. All we are concerned about at the end of the day is the amount of energy that's being used.
I understand that.
And it's ultimately at the end of the day, the energy usage can come from anyone. But the entity that is best placed to understand how much energy is being used at that data center is ultimately the person who is paying the energy bill. And it's not the people who are renting out the space that are paying that energy bill. So it's not always, it's like when you look at the way this bill works, it would require, so for instance, if 1,000 companies are renting space at a single data center, it would require 1,000 disclosures. From groups that don't have visibility into where the energy is coming from, or how much they're paying for the energy, or how the facility is being cooled. Whereas the owner would have perfect visibility into all this information. And all of the usage that's being used by their clients is flowing up to the owner anyways.
No, I understand it, but you did cite it. There's a whole paragraph that you're citing about this issue in the background for this bill. So to me, that you're in some way making it visible to all of us that this is the practice. It doesn't seem that it's also part of any sort of disclosure. And you're saying that it would be impossible to do that. Is that correct?
Well, so I think it would. So because the thing is, we're asking for disclosures before a data center has ever been built. So I don't think and the hope is a data center proprietor is hoping, of course, to lease out, assuming that it's a co-locator, right? It's a data center operator that's renting out space to other companies. They don't know at the time that they're building it, who they're going to rent out to. So there would be, if we instead shifted the disclosure to the people who are renting out space, there would be nobody to disclose, because at that time, there's nobody who's wishing to use that compute. So it makes sense that the person who has constructed the data center would be required to give those disclosures. If the duty fell on anybody else, there wouldn't be anything to disclose.
No, I understand the way it's constructed. I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
Tanya?
Hi, I'm Tanya. I think to me, the AC/DC Act is sine qua non. Like
Okay.
you really need that act.
Absolutely, yeah.
And actually I find that it's an opportunity, the fact that there are no laws governing these centers.
Mhm.
At the moment is an opportunity for us to pounce and get the laws
Absolutely.
in place.
Mhm.
So it has to be in tandem with Kirsten's bill.
Well, they're both.
They're
ours,
both
yeah.
hers.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. So I think it's great. It scared me when you said that they're pumping out water that, they've used. Why not make them responsible to recycle that water to bring it back to a clean level?
So this is something that we've looked at. We would love to impose those sorts of duties. The issue is that we are starting with the energy law, because in our perspective, the energy piece of all of this is a lot more visible. It's hitting people in their pocketbooks. This is the first place. We're not done after, once we get these bills over the finish line. There's certainly more work to be done. But in terms of cleaning up the discharged water, there's more research, more investigation that has to be done there, as far as what an adequate level of a safe discharge would be, and it's probably going to require some rulemaking with the environmental
Yeah,
regulators.
with environmental.
Right, we are biting off what we can chew at this particular moment.
I get it.
As we make more progress in the space, as we start to understand a little bit better what the nature of the discharges look like, we'll be able to regulate in that space a little bit more intelligently.
Okay, and my second question is, you're going to be getting all these parameters, like usage, size of the centers, employment, all of that. Is that a one-time data, or you're just they're going to have to continue, and how often do they update?
Annually.
Annually. Okay, I'm only asking you because, I was reading about these mega centers in Virginia. And, they said, oh, we're going to employ X amount of people. It turns out it was half of
Yep.
the people.
Mhm.
And they took over enormous space. I mean, I equate these centers now to, I'm old enough to remember when computers first started coming out. That's how old I am. And they were big, massive, monstrous things. And it looks to me like they're big now, but at some point, they'll be streamlined. And then what happens to all of that was built?
I mean, that's a business question, and it's a business question that a lot of people are asking questions about, because I recall seeing in the past couple of days a statement by the CEO of IBM that there's no way that these investments make sense with how quickly this hardware depreciates.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, we're expecting an AI bubble, but that's for another day.
Right, this is at the end of the day, this is a business conversation and it's for the investment community to make a decision as far as whether it makes sense for them. Our job is to protect.
No, it's great.
Yeah, our job is to protect the people of the state.
We're behind you 100%.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying but that's our objective here, right? Is
Yeah.
like, it's not our objective to preserve their speculative investment.
Yeah,
Our job is to protect the people of the state
people.
and to keep life affordable, and to keep our drinking water safe.
That's why the water question was.
So I had a question, because you mentioned at the beginning, like, the data centers used for something like Zoom is
Yeah.
one, employing more people and more useful than the data
Very
centers
different.
for AI.
Yeah.
But what about blockchain? Because that also is data processing and lots
So,
of data at the level of AI.
so crypto mining,
Yeah.
blockchain, it relies on the same types of hardware that AI does.
Yeah,
So it relies on GPUs, which are very energy intensive, which require massive cooling. I would group them in the same category
Yeah,
as AI data centers.
yeah.
But the difference is that AI, AI companies are much better capitalized.
Yeah.
Big tech is behind AI in a way that crypto miners are not. So the scale of a crypto mining operation is likely to be orders of magnitude smaller than an AI data center.
Okay, so that makes sense, and that's why the focus is talking about AI and not on the crypto and
Right.
blockchain stuff.
And so, I mean, I think it's an important distinction in the AC/DC Act is we have a bright line threshold for a large energy consumer, and that's a 20 megawatt threshold. It's a big facility. And the way we've defined it in a way that I think addresses your issue, at least in that bill, is that if there is a group of structures that are providing this a similar functionality, then it will be considered one data center for the purposes of the bill.
Yeah, and I think for the businesses, having a larger thing is actually more profitable for them because of the
Yeah.
quantum computing.
Quantum computing is a totally different beast, but the big data centers provide economies of scale.
Yeah.
And so, your per dollar investment there has a better payoff, and you can devote compute to different clients and, more creatively. So it provides a lot more optionality for the.
And then the last question I had, the environmental concerns and stuff, so I also support this bill, but have you talked to economists about what this does if we regulate and no one else is regulating in terms of businesses coming to this state versus other states? And the fact that so much of this is also happening outside the United States.
Yeah, so we haven't spoken to an economist per
Okay.
se on this one. I'd say, there's like from a geographical proximity perspective, there's not a huge benefit to New York consumers to siting these data centers in New York.
Okay.
So the benefit of a data center is just as great if it's in Pennsylvania, Virginia, New Jersey as it is in New York. So there is certainly a risk that data center operators and constructors might look to other states over New York. And frankly, I think given the costs to communities, that's something that we are comfortable with.
Yeah.
Until these companies are willing to make investments in green energy to power them,
Yeah.
given what they bring to the communities where they operate, which is place, which is very few jobs, which is water discharges, and like the net balance to New Yorkers, it pretty clearly like leans in one direction, and that's towards negative. So, I'm not saying like take your data centers elsewhere, but the fact that data centers are sited elsewhere is not necessarily a bad thing
Yeah.
for the people who are paying energy bills and living in New York State that aren't working for or running.
Yeah,
Yeah.
our biggest concern is affordability. I mean,
Yeah, and that's actually why I brought this all to the committee
Yeah,
itself,
it's
because when we're
affordability.
looking at the affordability crisis that people are, and how much of a household budget is utility expenses, it's actually a lot. I mean, these bills are helping, are gonna be tweaking at the margins with people's profitabilities, right? That doesn't matter to them, but for a household that's gonna see their electricity bills go up without these bills, 30%, 40%, whatever, that makes a huge difference. So that's,
and also, with local law 97, every building in New York City is going to be obligated to retrofit their buildings in order to meet, emission standards and so on and so forth. So here we are asking, residents, because 65% of New Yorkers live in apartment buildings, to carry this burden. And then, these guys are just like running amok. So
I mean, it's just when
it
you,
just doesn't make any sense.
and the more you dig in, the worse it gets, right?
The worse
Because
it gets,
They're,
yeah.
they're not just running amok, they're also purchasing dirty energy at a discount using purchase power agreements. So
Mhm.
basically, the cards are stacked in such a way that it really just does not make sense for the people who live and are trying to, live affordably and be healthy in the state. So it's a layered series of issues that I think that we can, as a state, be a leader in.
Well, I thank you, Senator Gonzalez, for your efforts. I loved both bills when I
This
first
has
saw.
been, extremely informative discussion. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
And does anybody have any, I guess I want to take another straw poll. I'm assuming we want to pass a resolution also in support of this bill and the companion bill, which we
Okay.
should also.
Yeah, I'll
Look
share
at.
some information
Yeah.
with you.
And if you can share,
Yeah.
some template, data,
Okay.
information, facts that we can use to help build our resolution from.
Yeah, I'm thinking back, earlier last month, there was a Bloomberg article that substantiated that the vast majority of energy cost increases from 2022 have been within like 200 miles of a large data center. So there is data that shows that people who live close to data centers experience increased energy
Mhm.
costs. So there is very robust data, and I'd be happy to share that article
Perfect.
with you guys.
That'll
Straw
sound
poll
really
again.
good. That'll sound really good on our resolution. Whereas.
That is also in the background on your bill, when you cited, Santa Clara, California, where they have a large data center there,
Mhm.
and that 82% of the electricity that was being consumed was from the data center, but the entire city had to absorb that. So that affected the rates of the consumers,
It's how it works,
bearing the brunt
right?
when 82% is being utilized by the data center.
It's how it works in
Yes.
New York State too.
Yeah.
That everyday consumers pay the cost to upgrade the infrastructure to allow data centers to operate.
So
So
the
just to,
AC/DC Act, is that to counteract that kind of thing? Is that part of, is that part of what that will encompass?
Yeah, I mean, all of these two bills work in concert to address the costs that are imposed to local community data centers. I would say probably more specifically than the other bill, because you're looking at the upgrades to the infrastructure and energy generation that'll be required to serve facility. And the AC/DC Act specifically includes the rates that customers pay should not be impacted by these data centers.
Ooh, sorry, one last question. Does the AC/DC Act require a review process by the community akin to like a ULURP when it comes to land use?
No, I would say,
No?
because the AC/DC Act is much more focused on the Public Service Commission and how they categorize their customers. I would say the closer one to that would be the first bill, the Data Center Transparency Bill, which is allowing for community engagement.
Okay,
But there isn't a ULURP process where the community has to sign off. That would be an additional feature that we'd have to take back and explore a little bit further.
yeah, I would suggest,
Okay.
yeah.
and then just to do a straw poll again, are there any objections from committee members to the support writing a resolution in support of the AI data center and the AC/DC bill?
We're all in.
Okay, great.
You
So
started to draft it.
yeah, I'll take that one.
Thank you, I'm leaving on Monday.
Yeah, thank you. I have, last time when not everybody was present, and then I wrote 2 resolutions, and it was a waste of time for them. Traumatized by that. They're present. And I can see opposition when we vote on this.
So that's why I'm taking the straw
Yeah,
poll,
yes,
so I make
yes.
sure that we're in agreement before we
Yeah.
spend our time writing the resolution.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
Thank you for joining us.
The AC/DC Act is something that's.
Ava Marie, let's finish our meeting first, and then we can have side
Okay.
conversations.
All right.
So just to close out, new business and old business, I don't have anything to report. Anyone else have any new business or old business to raise?
No, I mean, I would just add to we were also gonna have a kind of a larger conversation on AI, and we have somebody, the person from Science House who has wanted to come and speak to our committee. So he emailed us, me and Sandy again about,
Oh,
yeah. So we have,
Okay,
I told
so-
them we'll schedule him in the new year.
Well,
Yeah,
let's talk to him
Yeah,
first, but
okay.
I wanna know specifically what he wants.
Yeah.
We're not giving someone a platform here to just,
no, and you
You
can
and
talk to him directly, and he
yeah,
had much
yeah,
longer
yeah.
conversations with Sandy
Okay.
on it, yeah.
I'll loop back with
Yeah.
Candy down on that
Yeah.
issue, and then we'll
Yeah.
figure out where to go from there. And then
Yeah.
next time we'll talk about open meetings law
Yeah.
also, which will be on the for next. Okay,
Okay,
so do I have a motion to adjourn?
motion to adjourn.
Great, we're now adjourned, 7:52.
Wow. Feels so early.
Thank you.